So how many people here believe in equity and justice? How many people believe education is one of the most powerful tools in building our future society? Now, how many people here identify as a white supremacist? So we can agree that we all believe in equity and justice and using education to build that future. But is it possible that we might be sustaining white supremacy through our education system without even realizing it? When I was in 3rd grade, I was taught a very powerful lesson about white supremacy. This was in 1988, and I observed my teacher chase an African-American boy around the room, shove him against the wall, hold him down, and force him to eat soap. He spoke out against her. And the reason he spoke out against her was because one by one, throughout the year, she was moving every black student to one side of the room until the room was segregated into white students and black students. And one day she looked at the white students in the room and she said, "Don't you wish we could put a curtain there so we didn't have to look at them?" Now we take a minute with that. We could dismiss this whole thing and say that woman was a terrible person, she was a racist, and that was an anomaly. But instead, I would like for you to stay here with me in this uncomfortable scene for just a minute and imagine that this is actually a perfect metaphor for how our US education system is working even today. So Chris Emdin, a teacher of teachers, says that education is the civil rights issue of our time. The Wilmington Education Improvement Commission released a study showing there are really 2 school systems, one that primarily serves white students and one that primarily serves black and brown students. An EdBuild study recently reported that $2,000 more per year per child is given to those school districts that serve white students, which translates to $23 billion a year that black and brown students are being under-resourced in school. Now, in Audre Lorde's famous essay, "The master's tools can never be used to dismantle the master's house," she argues that we can't possibly destroy a system like white supremacy and build something new if we're using the same tools that created it. So if I fail to examine how I might be implicit and complicit in this system, then I might be sustaining that same white supremacy and passing it on to my students. So as we stay here for a minute, I would like to share with you 4 things that I could do. And at that time, I was 8. I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. I didn't even tell anyone about this until right now. But I feel like I'm being faced with this situation every day still, where I'm being put on a side. So I'd like to share with you 4 different things that I could do to respond to this situation. Number 1 is speak up. Can I hear you say speak up? Speak up. Thank you. So the first thing I could do is say something. Robin DiAngelo says in her book, White Fragility, that silence is one of the most important things that keeps white supremacy in place. So the first thing I could do is just talk about it. Now, when I first started preparing for this talk, I was afraid to tell people what my talk was about. But as I've been preparing the last few months, I've been talking about white supremacy a lot, very loudly, with everyone that I meet. My roommates have been getting up in the morning, they're taking showers, I'm talking about white supremacy. They're eating their Cheerios, I'm talking about white supremacy. They have people coming over the house, they're trying to play guitar and hang out, and I'm like, but what about white supremacy? What are we doing? Because the time is now to talk about this. We are in an era of urgency. As I've continued talking to people, I've realized that actually people are relieved to talk about this because so many people have experiences very similar to mine that they never felt like they could talk about and unpack. And really, we've been carrying this around. So number two is move. Can I hear you say move? Move. Thank you. So that teacher was trying to teach me that I was on her side just because I looked like her. She was putting me in a place. What if I cross that line? What if I move? because it's not really as dangerous for me to move. I have more choice in that situation. The only student who spoke up against her was physically assaulted. Now, I was not at risk for physical assault. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about in Between the World and Me how black people's bodies are actually in physical danger. Now, what danger am I in today giving this talk? Maybe somebody doesn't like my talk. Maybe I make somebody upset. That's a risk I can take. So number 3 is challenge. Can I hear you say challenge? So challenging our institutions. Now, if all of us got together in that room, people who are teachers in this room, you know that if a whole group of students gets against you, there is no way you're going to go forward with that lesson. Am I right? So if all the students got together in that room to challenge that teacher, I don't think she would have been able to do that. And as I'm speaking, also, we could just defer all the responsibility on that teacher, but she was part of a larger system too. She started this job, I'm sure because she wanted to teach little children, and instead she ended up inflicting harm because of the system she was a part of. So how can we challenge that institution? Right now there is a lawsuit by the American Civil Liberties Union about how schools are still segregated today, demanding that we educate all students equitably. And number 4, the one that I can do right now, because now I'm the teacher in that classroom. Number 4 is imagine. Can I hear you say imagine? Imagine. Thank you. And this is the most important thing, because that teacher couldn't imagine another possibility. And as long as we are segregated in our minds of these two sides, thinking of what side we're on, we're never going to move forward and create a new society. So we need to give students the space to create new tools to dismantle that house and build a new one. Now, I'm a teacher of performing arts and language arts. So who am I to be talking about race? Actually, I teach something very important. I teach students to imagine. And we might think, well, we can just diversify the curriculum, right, and include voices of diverse backgrounds. But I have to think about the way that I'm doing it. It's not really that simple, because if the only voices of people of color that I feature in my classroom are people expressing being marginalized and oppressed, that's all that students can imagine. So students have to be able to imagine a future in which they are empowered, where all students are empowered. And we look at things like N.K. Jemisin, the writer who wrote How Long Till Black Future Month, where she talks about in speculative fiction and science fiction, even people of color are underrepresented there. So we think about students writing themselves into the future, students of color writing themselves into places of power, and imagining that through fiction. Or things like musical theater, not just reimagining the future, but reimagining the past. How has Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton reimagined our history? By putting a Black George Washington on stage, by reimagining our founding fathers through the lens of hip-hop culture. We have to be able to imagine, because at some point, the idea of whiteness was just an idea in someone's imagination, and it was created as a system of oppression. Diane DePrima says, the famous poet, that the only war is the war against the imagination. The only war is the war against the imagination. The only war is the war against the imagination. And all other wars are subsumed in it. So how can we teach students to imagine a new future for all of us? Thank you very much.